Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. With the recent addition of Ranked in Teamfight Tactics, everyone is beginning the ladder climb and the grind to the top. This means it's a perfect time to study up on tips and tricks that challenger players have used in TFT in order to take the edge in their day-to-day game. Everything I'm about to list is for both new and advanced players. Hopefully at least one of these tips will help you out, and if they do, then you know what to do. Hit that like button, and if not, I understand. If not, maybe leave your own tip or trick in the comments down below. Alright, so I guess one other thing to note is I'm no challenger player. These aren't just tips I'm making up from me. These are tips that I found online, researched by other pro players, challenger players, or high ranked players. Okay? Good? We understand? It's not me, these aren't just my tips. Alright, so let's get straight into it at number 8. So this first tip might be weird, and it's actually to sell your first champion. Now it may seem counterintuitive at first, but it actually makes perfect sense. Let me break it down a little. So basically, if you pick a tier 2 champion from the first pool of champions, you will always want to sell it because you want to be able to put the received item on another champion when you're finally ready to combine items. But more important than that is the fact that in the early rounds, you're actually only offered tier 1 champions. Selling that tier 2 will allow you to get double the amount of gold, and this creates a ton of flexibility, and you can hopefully use it to take advantage in the early game and get your snowball going. Alright, so now on to our second tip. So usually prioritizing items on the carousel instead of units is the way to go. It's pretty well known that items are very useful, and it's strongly encouraged to either study the different item combinations or at least have some sort of cheat sheet to understand which pieces you need in order to create full items. This is because items are generally the make or break factor for the team composition you've spent the entire game building, so prioritizing them is pretty important. Of course, most things are situational, as Ranger Glacials and Elementalists can do fine without items, but generally speaking, the majority of team comps are dependent on items. To truly hit home how important items are, it's even sometimes pivoting, okay, so I want to explain this properly. To really hit home how important they are is that you can see a lot of pro players or very high tier players kind of pivot their entire composition just because they get one different item. So for example, if you're getting a bunch of tiers while building assassins, it is probably worth pivoting towards an ultimate dependent composition in order to take advantage of the tiers you've been receiving. Again, things are dependent, and it's not a strategy, it's not like a one strategy win all type thing. It's always important to pay attention to the pieces you're given and go about the best and most efficient route. This game is all about decisions based on RNG, so having the combinations known will go a very, very long way to always allow you to make the best decision. Anyways, from there, our third tip is to prioritize for cost units, as they are extremely important. This is because they're relatively easy to get to level 2 and still have great effects on power spikes. They're always important to consider, but even more so if they work decently into your synergy. Some of the best current carries of the entire game are Brand, Draven, Akali, and even Aurelion Sol. They're obviously not the only ones when it comes to standalone champions. Even Cho, Sedge as Sejuani, Gnar, and Kindred all have their usefulness. Kindred for utility, but the others have remarkable value for their CC. Another huge thing is that 4-cost units are in the game 90% of the time, meaning they're reliable for late game carries. But from there, we can move on to our fourth tip, and it is to do with economy, and more importantly, how to handle it. You should always level once before Krogs and then build straight to 50 gold. Use this 50 gold as a base minimum of gold that you should always have with you. Unless you feel that you're kind of falling super behind, it's probably better to lose out on a fight than drop below 50 gold. I mean, unless you're lucky to get pairs of units in order to create a level 3 unit, then obviously go for it, but in general, try to stay at 50 gold. Even when you have to go below the 50 mark, depending on your situation, you should never drop as low as 30 gold. It's easier to rebuild your economy from 30 or 50 gold versus 10 or even 20, in which you may fall behind and then stay behind. Having disposable gold to make a certain play in order to focus on a certain situation or obtaining a crucial power spike is something that you should always have in mind. Thinking about the what if is super important. Again, this game is situational, so these are general tips, not concrete every game tips, so avoid going all in unless you would basically die otherwise. Last thing you want is seeing a perfect combination of items and units that you could pick, but not having the gold disposable for it and then losing the game. I mean, that would be horrible. Anyhow, on to tip number 5. Tip number 5 has some contrast with our last tip, as it's to do with using some of the extra gold you have, and more specifically, buy units from the shop that you may use in the future, thinking about the what if once again. You can always sell them if you don't end up needing them anyways, but besides playing your luck, having more units will allow you to pivot your composition in the future when you feel it is needed, and it also denies those units from your opponents, as there is only a set amount of each champion. However, make sure you not to lose out on interest gold when doing this. That could basically be horrendous to the game. For example, if you have 48 gold, you can spend down to 40 without losing anything, but the better option would be to sell a unit for the interest bonus that is given every 10 gold and then make your move. For tip number 6, okay, so it might seem simple to some, but I'm sure not everyone knows it. Just always remember that you can lock in your shop for important purchases. There's a very tiny icon on the left side of your champ select screen every single round. It's massively important and underutilized though. Clicking this will ensure that the lineup of champions that you currently see lock down for a single turn. This means that if you spot something rare and don't have the money, you can lock down for a round in order to make that money and buy him during the next one. It's a crucial mechanic, so make sure to be aware of it. Tip number 7 is an odd one, and it's to intentionally take damage early on into the game. Yeah, that's it, so that might sound weird, but hear me out. If you want a specific item or combo, even if you have to lose some early rounds just to get to it, it won't be a big deal. The HP loss in the early rounds are very, very minimal, and it can allow you to get first pick in the carousel while still being around 85 HP. Even better, if you get really lucky, you might be able to pick up a fully completed item for basically free. A lot of players do this every time they're already close to last place, in which they force themselves down simply for the carousel, as a lot of the early game is very dependent on that first round. There isn't too much of a downside either, so it's pretty risk-free and can only be done for the first carousel. Doing this for any other one will have you taking way too much intentional damage, and the risk-reward would be way out of balance, so you should probably avoid doing it then. For our 8th and final tip, we highly suggest you scout your opponents. Now, it may be overwhelming with the high player count, but it's extremely important to pay attention to what others are building. Every single round, players share the same unit pool, so making sure you know the opponent's comp will go a very, very long way. As an example, you would want to avoid building assassins if there are another 3 other players already after the exact same comp. I mean, just imagine having to play RNG with another 3 players, all aiming to take the exact same units. This can be even more useful in the later game when it's just down to the top 3 or 4, where you can adjust your strategy to better counter opponents, or even take a unit from the pool to dismount an opponent with a specific strategy. I mean, if you know that an opponent is very reliant on, I don't know, their Rengar, I know that's very specific, but let's say they're really reliant on their Rengar for some reason, and you see a Rengar in the bottom pool, why not snag him? Try to, either completely cancel or delay a level 3. So it can be extremely, extremely hard. I'd say that this tip is probably the most advanced one, as you need to not only kind of have a general understanding of the game, but you have to have an in-depth understanding of the game, especially since there are various strategies and decisions any player can make at any single time. So thinking ahead of multiple opponents through multiple routes is difficult, but it's one of the most prominent reasons TFT is such a fun game. Someone who can think far ahead will be victorious and will honestly generally win most of their games, even though it's an extremely RNG based title. Anyhow, That's all the tips we have for today. If you guys did enjoy the video, then consider hitting that like button and maybe even subscribing for some future TFT content. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.